The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Copper Ridge, a frontier town where justice was as scarce as water in the desert. Sheriff Marcus Brennan posted the notice on the wooden board outside his office, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he hammered the final nail. The decree was clear and brutal. All Apache children found within town limits were to be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the shadows of the general store, her heart pounding as she read the words that would haunt her conscience forever. At 35, she had already buried her husband Thomas in the small cemetery on the hill, claimed by fever the winter before. Her calloused hands, still bearing the calluses of farm work, clenched into fists as she absorbed the meaning of the sheriff's proclamation. "It's about time," muttered Jacob Fletcher, the town's blacksmith, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "These Apache raids have gone on long enough. Can't trust any of them, not even the young ones." Eleanor's blue eyes, the color of winter sky, hardened as she watched the gathering crowd nod in agreement. She had seen enough death in her life to know that hatred only bred more hatred, yet here was her community, her neighbors. Calling for the blood of children, the autumn wind carried the scent of mesquite and dust through the settlement, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled overhead, its shadow dancing across the red earth. Eleanor pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, the fabric frayed from years of frontier life, and walked slowly back toward her small cabin on the outskirts of town. That evening, as she sat by her fireplace mending clothes by candlelight, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the desert silence. Through her window, she could see torches flickering in the darkness, and the voices of men filled with purpose and rage. They were hunting. Eleanor extinguished her candle and moved to the window, pressing her face against the cool glass. The moonlight, she could make out the silhouettes of riders, their voices carrying on the night air as they searched every building, every hiding place. Her heart raced as she realized they were conducting a sweep of the entire area, looking for any Apache who might be hiding among them. "We know you're out there." Sheriff Brennan's voice boomed across the desert. "The law is clear. Any Apache found will be dealt with swiftly." Eleanor's hands trembled as she watched the torches move closer to her property. She had always prided herself on being a law-abiding citizen, but something deep in her soul rebelled against this particular law. The memory of her own childhood, of being different, of being the daughter of a poor Irish immigrant in a town that looked down on foreigners, came flooding back. As the search party moved past her cabin, Eleanor made a decision that would change everything. She would not be complicit in this hatred. She would not stand by and watch children be hunted like animals. Whatever the cost, she would find a way to resist. The next morning brought news that chilled Eleanor to the bone. A small Apache camp had been discovered in the nearby hills, and among the survivors was a boy, no more than 8 years old, found hiding in a cave. The child had been brought to town and was being held in the jail. Awaiting the sheriff's final decision, Eleanor's heart broke as she imagined the terror that child must be feeling. She had never had children of her own, a source of quiet sorrow in her marriage to Thomas, but her maternal instincts surged with protective fury. She knew she had to act, but the question was how. That afternoon, she made her way to the jail under the pretense of bringing Sheriff Brennan some fresh bread, a gesture that would seem perfectly normal to anyone watching. The sheriff, a man hardened by years of frontier violence, accepted the offering gratefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're too kind," he said, his voice tired. "These are difficult times for all of us." "Indeed they are, Sheriff," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I couldn't help but hear about the child you've captured. Such a terrible situation." Brennan's expression darkened. "The law is the law, ma'am. That boy's people have been raiding our settlements for months. We can't show mercy to their kind, not even the young ones. They grow up to be killers, every last one of them." Eleanor nodded, hiding her disgust behind a mask of understanding. "Of course, Sheriff, I understand completely. Still, it must be difficult to ... handle such matters." "The boy will be dealt with at sunset," Brennan said matter-of-factly. "It's for the good of the community." As Eleanor left the jail, her mind raced with possibilities. She had less than 6 hours to figure out a way to save a child's life. And she was just one woman against an entire town consumed by hatred and fear. Sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Eleanor put her desperate plan into action. She had spent the afternoon gathering supplies, her late husband's clothes, a small bundle of food, and most importantly, a vial of laudanum she had saved from Thomas's final illness. Her hands shook as she prepared what she hoped would be enough. To make the sheriff drowsy without causing permanent harm, Eleanor's cabin sat on a small rise overlooking the town, and from her kitchen window, she could see the jail clearly. The building was simple adobe construction, with thick walls and small barred windows. She had noticed during her visit that Sheriff Brennan kept the keys hanging on a hook near his desk, and that he was the only guard on duty most evenings. As the shadows lengthened, Eleanor made her way back to town, carrying another loaf of bread and a mason jar filled with coffee. Coffee that had been carefully doctored with just enough laudanum to make a man very sleepy. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the jail, knowing that what she was about to do would make her a criminal in the eyes of the law. "Sheriff Brennan," she called softly as she entered the office. "I brought you some supper. I know these long days must be exhausting." The sheriff looked up from his paperwork, his eyes bloodshot from fatigue. "Mrs. Whitmore, you don't need to trouble yourself, but I appreciate the kindness." Eleanor set the bread and coffee on his desk, her hands surprisingly steady. "It's no trouble at all. We all need to look out for each other in these difficult times." As Brennan began to eat and drink, Eleanor made small talk about the weather, the harvest, anything to keep him occupied while the laudanum took effect. She could hear faint sounds from the back of the jail. The boy was still alive, still waiting for a death sentence to be carried out. Within 20 minutes, the sheriff's eyelids began to droop. His speech became slurred, and his head nodded. Forward onto his chest, Eleanor waited another 5 minutes to be certain. He was deeply unconscious before she carefully took the keys from their hook. Her feet made no sound on the wooden floor as she made her way to the back of the jail. The cell was small and dark, with straw scattered on the floor. In the corner, curled up like a wounded animal, was the Apache boy. He was smaller than Eleanor had expected, his dark hair matted with dirt and his clothes torn, his eyes large and fearful fixed on her as she approached the cell. He said nothing, but she could see the resignation in his face, the look of a child who had already accepted his fate. "I'm not going to hurt you," Eleanor whispered in English, then tried to remember the few Apache words she had learned from a trader years ago. "Friend," she said softly. "Help." The boy's eyes widened slightly, but he remained pressed against the far wall of the cell. Eleanor slowly unlocked the door, her hands trembling as the key turned in the lock. "Come with me," she said, extending her hand. "I'll keep you safe." For a moment, the boy hesitated. Then, perhaps recognizing something in Eleanor's eyes, desperation, determination, or maybe just human kindness, he took a tentative step forward. Eleanor quickly wrapped him in a blanket she had brought, covering his distinctive features and clothing. "We need to be very quiet," she whispered. "Can you do that for me?" The boy nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. Together, they crept out of the jail and into the gathering darkness. Eleanor's cabin was only a half-mile away, but it felt like the longest walk of her life. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every sound in the desert made her heart skip a beat. They made it to the cabin without incident, but Eleanor knew this was only the beginning. By morning, the entire town would be searching for both the escaped Apache boy and whoever had helped him. She had perhaps 8 hours before Sheriff Brennan woke up and discovered what had happened. Inside the cabin, Eleanor lit a single candle and knelt down to the boy's level. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the way he took in every detail of his surroundings. Despite his fear, there was a strength about him that reminded her of the wild horses that roamed the territory, beautiful, untamed, and desperately in need of protection. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The boy remained silent, watching her with careful eyes. Eleanor pointed to herself. "Eleanor," she said. Then she pointed to him and raised her eyebrows questioningly. After a long moment, the boy spoke in barely a whisper. Ishone. Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she had felt in days. Ishone, that's a beautiful name. She stood up and moved to her kitchen, pulling out bread, dried meat, and a cup of water. The boy ate hungrily, as if he hadn't had food in days. As Ishone ate, Eleanor's mind raced ahead to the challenges they would face. She couldn't keep him hidden in her cabin forever. The townspeople would search every building, every hiding place. She needed a more permanent solution, and she needed it quickly, Looking at the boy's distinctive features, an idea began to form. It was risky, perhaps impossible, but it might be their only chance. If she could somehow change his appearance, make him look less obviously Apache, she might be able to pass him off as something else entirely. Eleanor went to her bedroom and pulled out some of Thomas's old clothes, the ones he had worn as a boy. They were too big for Ison, but with some alterations, they might work. She also gathered her sewing supplies and a pair of scissors. "Ishan," she said, returning to the kitchen. "I need you to trust me. I'm going to help you, but we have to change how you look. Do you understand?" The boy's eyes went to the scissors in her hand, and for a moment, fear flickered across his face. Eleanor set the scissors down and knelt beside him again. "I won't hurt you," she promised, "but if people see you as you are now, they'll take you away from me. I want to keep you safe, but I need your help." Ishan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Eleanor began by cutting his hair, transforming his long black locks into a shorter, more typical frontier style. Next, she helped him into Thomas's old clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pants legs to fit his small frame. The transformation was remarkable. With his hair cut and wearing settler's clothes, Ishan looked like any other frontier child, perhaps. With some Mexican or Mediterranean heritage, it wasn't perfect, but it might be enough to fool casual observers. Now Eleanor said, "If anyone asks, you're my nephew. Your name is ... Adam. Adam Whitmore. Your parents died of fever back east, and you've come to live with me. Can you remember that?" Ishan, now Adam, nodded solemnly. "Adam Whitmore," he repeated, his accent barely noticeable. Eleanor felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. But she knew that the real test would come with the dawn, when the entire town would be searching for the escaped Apache boy and demanding answers about who had helped him escape. As she prepared a bed for Adam on the floor near the fireplace, Eleanor realized that her life had just changed forever. She was no longer just a lonely widow trying to survive on the frontier. She was now a mother, protector, and fugitive all at once. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but as she watched Adam settle into sleep, his small hand clutching the blanket she had given him, Eleanor felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. This child needed her, and she needed him too. More than she had realized, tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new tests of her resolve. But tonight, for the first time in months, Eleanor Whitmore was not alone. Dawn broke gray and ominous over Copper Ridge, and with it came the sound Eleanor had been dreading, the thunder of hoofbeats and angry voices. She had barely slept, spending most of the night watching Adam sleep and preparing for what she knew would be the most challenging day of her life. "Adam," she whispered, gently shaking the boy awake. "They're coming. Remember what we talked about? You're my nephew from back east, your parents died of fever, and you've come to live with me." The boy's eyes were alert immediately, the survival instincts of his people evident even in his exhaustion. "Adam Whitmore," he whispered back, his voice stronger now than it had been the night before. Eleanor had spent the early morning hours staging her cabin to support their story. She had pulled out an old photograph of Thomas's family, positioning it on the mantel where it would be clearly visible. She had also prepared a simple breakfast, making sure there were 2 plates set out, as if she and her nephew had been living together for some time. The pounding on her door came sooner than expected. Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and opened the door to find Sheriff Brennan standing on her porch, his face thunderous with rage. Behind him stood a group of townsmen, including Jacob Fletcher and several others she recognized. "From the general store, Mrs. Whitmore," Brennan said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I need to search your property." Eleanor's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course, Sheriff. But may I ask why? Has something happened?" "The Apache boy escaped last night," Brennan replied, his eyes scanning the interior of her cabin. "Someone drugged me and let him loose. I'm searching every building in the area." Eleanor stepped aside, allowing the men to enter. "How terrible. I hope you catch whoever did such a thing. Come in, please. Adam and I were just finishing breakfast." The sheriff's eyes immediately went to the boy sitting at the kitchen table. Adam looked up with curious eyes, a piece of bread in his hand, playing the part of a confused child perfectly. "Who's this?" Brennan demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. "This is my nephew, Adam," Eleanor said smoothly. "Thomas's brother's boy. He arrived last week from Pennsylvania. Poor child lost both his parents to fever this summer." Jacob Fletcher stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Adam's features. "He's got a dark complexion for a Pennsylvania boy." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "His mother was Italian," she explained. "Beautiful woman, but the fever took her just as quickly as it took his father. Adam's been through so much trauma, he's barely spoken since he arrived." Sheriff Brennan approached the table, his weathered face stern as he looked down at Adam. "Boy, what's your name?" Adam looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "Adam Whitmore, sir?" he said quietly, his accent barely detectable. "Where are you from?" Brennan continued. "Pennsylvania, sir. But Mama and Papa died, so I came to live with Aunt Eleanor." The sheriff's expression softened slightly. Eleanor could see him struggling between his suspicions and the evidence before him. Adam looked nothing like the wild Apache boy he had seen in the jail cell the night before. "You mind if we search the cabin?" Brennan asked Eleanor. "Not at all," she replied. "Though I confess I'm curious about this Apache boy. Was he dangerous?" "Dangerous enough," Fletcher muttered, overturning Eleanor's mattress and searching through her belongings. "His people killed the Morrison family just last month. We can't take any chances." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard about the Morrison massacre, but she had also heard rumors that it had been caused by a dispute over cattle, not an unprovoked attack. The truth, it seemed, was less important than the fear it generated. As the men searched her cabin, Eleanor noticed Adam watching their every move with the alertness of a wild animal. She caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. He was handling the situation remarkably well for a child who had been through so much trauma. "Find anything?" Brennan called out to his men. "Nothing, Sheriff," one of them replied. "Just normal household items." Brennan studied Eleanor's face carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore, you didn't hear anything unusual last night? See anyone suspicious around your property?" Eleanor shook her head. "I'm afraid not, Sheriff. Adam and I retired early. The poor child is still adjusting to life out here." She paused, then added, "I do hope you find whoever helped that boy escape. It's shameful that someone would interfere with the law." The irony of her words was not lost on her, but she delivered them with perfect sincerity. Brennan seemed satisfied, but Fletcher continued to stare at Adam with suspicion. "Boy, Fletcher said suddenly, you ever see any Indians where you come from?" Adam shook his head. "No, sir. Aunt Eleanor told me there are Indians here, though. Are they scary?" Fletcher's expression relaxed slightly. "Scary enough, boy. You stick close to your aunt, and don't go wandering off alone." As the search party prepared to leave, Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and dread. They had passed the first test, but she knew this was far from over. The townspeople would be watching her more closely now, and any mistake could be fatal for both her and Adam. "Mrs. Whitmore," Brennan said as he reached the door, "if you hear anything, see anything suspicious, you let me know immediately." "Of course, Sheriff. I hope you find what you're looking for." After the men left, Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. Adam remained at the table, but she could see the tension in his small shoulders. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Adam nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the window. "They will come back," he said quietly. Eleanor knew he was right. The immediate danger had passed, but the larger challenge was just beginning. She would need to integrate Adam into the community, make his presence seem natural and normal. It would require careful planning and considerable courage. Over the next few days, Eleanor began taking Adam into town with her, introducing him to the shopkeepers and neighbors as her nephew. Most people accepted the story without question, but she could feel the weight of constant scrutiny. Every interaction was a potential trap, every conversation a test of their carefully constructed lie. The most difficult moment came when they encountered Mrs. Henderson, the schoolteacher, outside the general store. Eleanor had been dreading this meeting, knowing that an educated woman might be more likely to see through their deception. "Eleanor, dear," Mrs. Henderson said warmly, "I heard you had a visitor." "Yes, this is my nephew, Adam," Eleanor replied, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's come to live with me." Mrs. Henderson knelt down to Adam's level, her kind eyes studying his face. "Hello, Adam. I'm Mrs. Henderson. I teach at the school here. Would you like to come to school with the other children?" Adam looked up at Eleanor, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. They had discussed this possibility, but the thought of putting him in a classroom full of other children terrified her. "I think Adam needs some time to adjust first," Eleanor said carefully. "He's been through a great deal." Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically. "Of course, dear, but when he's ready, he'll always be welcome. Education is so important for a child's future." As they walked away from the encounter, Eleanor realized that she was facing a dilemma she hadn't fully considered. If Adam was to live as her nephew, he would need to participate in the normal activities of a frontier child. That meant school, church, and community events. Each of these represented a new risk, a new opportunity for someone to discover the truth. That evening, as she and Adam sat by the fire, Eleanor broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Adam," she said gently, "if you're going to live here, you're going to need to learn to be ... different. Not because there's anything wrong with who you are, but because it's the only way to keep you safe." Adam looked at her with solemn eyes. "I understand," he said quietly. "My people are gone. I must become someone else to live." Eleanor's heart broke at the resignation in his voice. "Not someone else," she said firmly. "You'll always be who you are inside, but you'll need to learn. New ways, new words, new customs. Can you do that?" Adam nodded. "I can learn," and learn he did. Over the following weeks, Eleanor began teaching Adam not just English, but the mannerisms and behaviors of a frontier child. She taught him about Christianity, about American history, about the expectations placed on young boys in their community. It was a painful process. Adam was remarkably intelligent and adaptable. He learned quickly and seemed to understand instinctively what was expected of him in different situations. More importantly, he began to trust her completely, and she found herself falling deeper into the role of mother with each passing day. The turning point came when Adam had been with her for nearly a month. They were walking back from the general store when they encountered a group of children playing in the street. One of them, a boy named Tommy Fletcher, Jacob's son, called out to Adam, "Hey, you, new boy, want to play?" Eleanor felt her heart stop. This was the test she had been dreading most. Adam looked up at her, seeking permission and reassurance. "Go ahead," she said softly, "but remember what we talked about." Adam nodded and walked over to join the group. Eleanor watched from a distance, her hands clenched in anxiety as he began to play with the other children. To her amazement, he fit in perfectly, laughing and running with the natural exuberance of any 8-year-old boy. For the first time since she had rescued him, Eleanor allowed herself to hope that their impossible plan might actually work. Adam was not just surviving in his new life, he was beginning to thrive. But even as she watched him play, Eleanor knew that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The frontier was an unforgiving place, and prejudice ran deep in the hearts of men. One mistake, one moment of inattention, could still destroy everything they had built together. As the sun set over Copper Ridge, casting long shadows across the dusty street, Eleanor made a silent promise to the boy who had become her son. No matter what came next, she would protect him with her life. The law might have ordered his death, but love had given him a new beginning. 3 months had passed since Adam had come to live with Eleanor, and autumn was giving way to winter in the Arizona territory. The boy had settled into his new life, with remarkable resilience, attending school regularly and making friends among the other children. To the outside world, he appeared to be nothing more than a quiet, well-behaved boy from back east who had found a new home with his loving aunt. But Eleanor knew the truth was far more complicated. She could see the way Adam sometimes stared at the distant mountains, his eyes filled with a longing she couldn't fully comprehend. She noticed how he moved differently when he thought no one was watching, with the fluid grace of his Apache heritage. Most troubling of all, she had begun to observe the subtle signs of his growing internal conflict. The crisis came on a bitter December morning when Eleanor was hanging laundry behind her cabin. Adam was supposed to be at school, but she looked up to see him running toward her across the frozen ground. His face streaked with tears and his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "Aunt Eleanor," he cried, throwing himself into her arms. They know. They know who I am." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "What happened? Tell me exactly what happened." Adam's words came out in a rush between sobs. "Tommy Fletcher. He brought an old Apache necklace to school. Said his father took it from a dead Indian. It was ... It was my mother's. I recognized the pattern she made. I couldn't help myself. I reached for it, and I said something in Apache. Mrs. Henderson heard me." Eleanor felt the world spin around her. This was the moment she had been dreading, the inevitable collision between Adam's true identity and the facade they had so carefully constructed. "What did Mrs. Henderson say?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "She asked me where. I learned Apache words, I told her. I told her I heard them from traders, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't believe me. She kept staring at me, and I ran. I ran away from school and came here." Eleanor held Adam close, her mind racing through their limited options. Mrs. Henderson was an intelligent woman, and if she was suspicious, it would only be a matter of time before she shared her concerns with others. They had perhaps hours before. The entire town would be asking questions they couldn't answer. "Adam," Eleanor said gently, "look at me. We knew this day might come. We've always known that we might have to leave this place." Adam's eyes widened with fear. "Leave? But this is our home. Where would we go?" Eleanor had been thinking about this possibility for weeks. Ever since she had noticed increasing scrutiny from some of the townspeople, there are places where people don't ask too many questions about the past. California, maybe, or Oregon Territory. Places where a woman and her nephew could start over. "But I don't want to start over again," Adam said, his voice breaking. "I want to stay here with you. I want to keep being your son." Eleanor's heart shattered at his words. She had come to love this boy as fiercely as any mother could love a child, and the thought of uprooting him again, of forcing him to rebuild his identity once more, was almost unbearable. "You will always be my son," she said firmly. "Nothing will ever change that. But sometimes being a family means making difficult choices to keep each other safe." Before Adam could respond, they heard the sound of approaching horses. Eleanor peered around the corner of the cabin to see a group of riders led by Sheriff Brennan heading directly toward her property. Her heart sank as she recognized Jacob Fletcher, Mrs. Henderson, and several other prominent townspeople among the group. "Go inside," Eleanor whispered urgently to Adam. "Get into the bedroom and stay there no matter what happens. Do you understand?" Adam nodded, his face pale but determined. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect you," Eleanor said simply, "just like I promised." As Adam disappeared into the cabin, Eleanor straightened her shoulders and walked out to meet the approaching group. She had always known this confrontation would come, and she was determined to face it with dignity and courage. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need to have a serious conversation." "Of course, Sheriff. What can I do for you?" Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her usual kindness replaced by a steely determination. "Eleanor, I've been teaching children for over 20 years. I know when a child is hiding something important. That boy of yours, he's not who you say he is." Eleanor felt a surge of protective fury. "I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Henderson. Adam is my nephew, and I have the documentation to prove it." "Documentation can be forged," Jacob Fletcher interjected harshly. "That boy has Apache features, Apache mannerisms, and today he spoke Apache words. We think he's the same boy who escaped from our jail 3 months ago." Eleanor's mind raced, searching for a way to deflect their suspicions. That's ridiculous. Adam arrived here from Pennsylvania weeks before any Apache boy was captured. You're letting your fear cloud your judgment. "Then you won't mind if we take the boy for questioning," Brennan said coldly. "If he's really your nephew, he'll have nothing to hide. He's been through enough trauma in his young life without being subjected to your paranoid accusations." "Ma'am," Brennan said, his hand moving to his gun, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but that boy is coming with us." Eleanor had always known this moment would come, and when the sheriff arrived to take the Apache boy, she stood her ground, calm and resolute. She declared that the child was under her protection, and if they wanted him, they'd have to go through her. Alone, against a group of armed men, her only weapon was the fierce love of a mother defending her child. Accused of endangering the community by harboring an enemy, Eleanor challenged their fear with compassion. She reminded them that the boy was only 8 years old, a child who had already lost everything. When the sheriff threatened to arrest her, she refused to step aside, ready to face the consequences. Then, Adam stepped out of the cabin, standing tall despite his youth. In a calm, clear voice, he declared his truth. He was Apache, yes, but also Adam Whitmore, and Eleanor was his mother in every way that mattered. His words moved her deeply. Even when the crowd reacted with hostility, Adam remained firm, reminding them he was the same boy who studied in their school, played with their children, and prayed in their church. When the sheriff moved to arrest him, Eleanor intervened once again, demanding to know what his real crime was: being born Apache, surviving tragedy, being a child in need of love. The crowd hesitated. Eleanor appealed to their conscience, asking them to truly look at Adam and see the innocent child he was. Mrs. Henderson, torn but honest, admitted that Adam had always been kind and well-behaved. Adam added that he barely remembered his first family, but had found love again with Eleanor, and if that made him dangerous, he didn't understand what safety meant anymore. Eleanor squeezed his hand and declared that if someone needed to be punished, it should be her. She had broken the law, yes, but in choosing love over hate. Slowly, doubt began to spread among the townspeople. Some murmured, others exchanged uncertain glances. Mrs. Henderson suggested they reconsider. Given Adam had never caused trouble, Fletcher objected, insisting the law was clear. Apache children were to be treated as threats, but Eleanor didn't flinch. "Then the law is wrong," she said, "and I will not be a part of it."